Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast in association with the John Campea Show. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. The Designing Hollywood podcast show is dedicated to all things movies, the movie industry, and its talented professionals.
Thank you for tuning in to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Universal's Costume Department, the best in the world.
Today's guest is an esteemed American costume designer known for his work in film and television. His work has been recognized with an Emmy nomination and 3 Costume Designers Guild Award nominations. He frequently transforms Jessica Chastain in her work together on The Eyes of Tammy Faye, George and Tammy, Mother's Instinct, The Savant, and the upcoming Michael Franco film, Dreams. He is known for his meticulous approach to character design and his intensive research process. His breakout work on Bo Burnham's indie hit 8th Grade earned him a spot on Variety's Artisan Impact Report. Collaboration on Ocean's 8 led him to transform Emma Thompson into a late-night host for Mindy Kaling's Late Night, directed by Nisha Ganatra. Before designing his own work, he spent a decade working as an assistant costume designer on projects including Saturday Night Live, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, The Blacklist, man, do I love me some James Spader, Joy, The Bourne Legacy, and 30 Rock. Upcoming work can be seen in Nick Cassavetes' Bruno Penguin and The Staten Island Princess. Without further ado, it is our great pleasure to welcome costume designer Mitchell Travers to the Designing Hollywood show. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you. You know, you have a really eclectic, as we just said, a very eclectic background working on both television and films with a lot of really interesting people. I mean, I thought what Bo Burnham did during COVID was one of the more interesting things, and I really liked his film, which you worked on. Are you an LA native? And if so, how did you get into the business?
I am not. I am the first of my family to run away to Hollywood. And I do think I shocked some people by saying that I was going to do this. And I did. And I think they're still sort of figuring out what it is I do. You know, it's like my mother worked in medicine. And so that was a very stable life. And, you know, for me to run away to work in the arts was sort of crazy and foreign. But I think finally she's starting to be like, you know what, you could make it in this world. You could be all right.
Where did you run away from?
So I grew up in Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
I ran to Boston, and then I moved. I always knew that I wanted to be a New Yorker, and so after I went to college, I moved to New York City, and I started that New York hustle. I knew I wanted to be a costume designer from a very, very young age. And I just it was my mission. I started to study the costume designers that I thought were most interesting. And I started to try to track them down. I worked on Broadway as an assistant costume designer for a number of years. And just tried to figure out where am I going to fit into this world? I knew that it would be character creation and costume design. But I didn't know, am I going to, what's most interesting to me? Broadway, film, television, concert wardrobe. I was so young in the world. I just wanted to sort of find my footing. And the great thing about working in costume design is that if you meet the right people, they will help you get where you want to be. Because the secret is that almost all costume designers are very similar in that sense. They have a goal and they sort of get seen by the right people at the right time, and they get shepherded into jobs that make sense for where they're at and what they're interested in. So, I was so interested in costume design, and then I was in that world, and I realized how gracious and kind most of the people who do this for a living are.
Yeah. Now, when you were growing up, were you studying? A lot of people tell me that, well, I started dressing my dolls, or they were in school, they did theater in school, and then they went into college and kept going. Or everybody, when you were younger and growing up, were you doing anything costume related? Were you working on school plays or anything like that? And did you have any kind of academic? Some people tell me they did go to school and they studied graphic design or colors or things like that. Was that in your background as well?
I was raised by a very stylish mother and grandmother, and
Mm,
so that was my first introduction to style and the way that an outfit could transform your perception or your mood or your position. And so I knew from a very, very early age that like clothing and attire is essential for the life or the way I see life. And so having those two influences was very impactful. And they were also very they were just great in terms of getting me in front of things that I was interested in.
sure.
And if I showed interest in things, they would they would allow me to try things and fail at things and succeed at things. So I knew pretty early, like I loved clothes, I loved getting dressed, I loved Halloween was huge in my household.
Right.
Um, I would go with my mother and we would figure out what my Halloween costume would be. My mom's a very creative person as well, so um, just having these conversations with my mom about what I wanted to be, and we would find the fabric. It just lit something up inside of me that was like undeniable. It was this connection to this other world that I was like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. And then I remember watching the behind the scenes, like, you know, featurette from, actually, I think the first time I ever saw costumes, it was Morticia Adams.
Okay.
And then the second time I remember seeing costumes was The Fifth Element. And so it occurred to me then,
Jean
like,
Paul
oh,
Gaultier.
there's, of course, the one. It occurred to me, like, oh, this is a job. And there's somebody whose job it is to work with costumes to make characters that create these movies that I would run away to all the time. So I was very lucky in life that I knew what I wanted to do from about like probably 8 or 9 years old. I was very, very young. And then I had a support system around me that encouraged it. So then I started to do theater. I demanded my parents construct a theater in our basement using like track lighting, and we we never actually got around to doing the show, but I had the costumes ready. So I have had a rack, so to speak, in my life from this like basement theater that my parents made me do. And I would corral all the neighborhood kids to play their roles and do their fittings. But again, there was no rehearsal. We never put a play on, but it was designed and ready for an audience. And I had the best childhood doing that.
That is amazing. And I love that you picked The Fifth Element because the diversity of costumes in that film was amazing. I mean, the president of the galaxy, Tiny Liston, and then you have Zorg, Gary Oldman's his villainous characters. You've got the alien races, the ultimate, the greatest science fiction diva ever put on film. I mean, what a great touchstone. I'm a huge fan of that movie. I saw that movie opening night at the Cinerama here in Hollywood.
I remember seeing the design of that movie and thinking like, well, if this is the future, I don't think it's that bad. I think we'll all have fun. There's like leopard print cat suits and this like incredible orange harness, and I've just felt like, okay, we'll be fine. We'll figure it out. There's still art. There's still fashion. Like these are all signs of a healthy culture to me.
Bruce Willis was wearing an orange tank top for the majority of that film. It all worked out. But how did you? It's one thing from designing costumes in your basement in your theater to actually getting to Broadway. So how you made the move to New York? Were you cold calling people? Like how did you get into Broadway? How did you make that first connection?
I've had a few moments in my life where it was just like the right place at the right time with the right person. And one of the first instances of this was in college. I was told by our costume design professor that a costume designer named Gary Jones was coming to our university to give a lecture. And so this was my first chance to meet a professional, real deal costume designer.
Wow.
I had grown up watching Gary's movies, and because I had studied these people, I knew that, Gary Jones had this history with Anne Roth, and I knew about all of Anne Roth's work. And so it was I was like charged by the idea that I could listen to this lecture. And so I went. Gary Jones was wonderful, told us all about the realities of our business, the, you know, the highs, the lows, the in-betweens. And I was just like obsessed with the way he spoke about his job and his life. And so at the end of the lecture, I got in line with all these other eager students who wanted to go and have their, you know, one-on-one chat with Gary. And I just was super earnest and honest. And I explained to him, like, I want to live this life and I really want to do this. And is there any way that I could ever shadow you or be your assistant? And, you know, just like naive. I had no idea how it worked, but I figured if I was ever going to stand in front of a costume designer and try, I might as well start. And if any, you know, listeners of your show will, if they've met Gary Jones, they know that he is like kindness personified. And so he was so kind to me, and he said, like, yeah, of course, like, here's my email, like, reach out.
Right.
And I'm sure he thought I would send my portfolio or whatever. Instead, I wrote myself a grant and got myself funding for the summer between my junior year and my senior year of college. And so when I wrote back to Gary, I said, like, I have figured out a way to pay for myself entirely. What are you shooting and can I come?
Wow.
And Gary said, yeah. At the time, he was shooting a Seth Rogen comedy in, where was that? That was in Southwest. I think we were like in Arizona or something. And so Gary said, like, yes, I'm doing this Seth Rogen comedy. If you can come on down, like, let me know. And I flew myself there, got a PA job on his film. And I just started shadowing him and trying to understand what he did and why he made choices he made. You know, I was not in any fittings or anything. I was very much like a glorified runner that I think most people were kind of shocked how I got there, but I was so determined to figure this out.
Kids, that is how you do it. I mean, that's amazing. Now, you went on, this is amazing to me. You went on and worked on Gary Marshall with Gary Marshall's
Yes.
New Year's Eve.
Yes, that's right.
So if people haven't seen New Year's Eve, this just blows me away. So New Year's Eve, Gary Marshall, it's kind of an anthology movie with all these characters. But it's not just an anthology movie with all these characters. It has Michelle Pfeiffer, Zac Efron, Robert De Niro, Halle Berry, Carrie Elways, Alyssa Milano, Common, Jessica Biel, Seth Meyers, Sarah Paulson, Till Schweiger, Carla Gugino, and Katherine Heigl, John Bon Jovi, Sofia Vergara. I mean, it's an unbelievable Ashton Kutcher. So you're working on a show. You go with him on this show. It's not just a Seth Rogen movie. It's a movie with everybody. And I know that you were still low man on the totem pole then. But what was that like? Jumping into a movie that is so star-studded, shooting in New York with Gary Marshall.
I have to jump back just for 1 second because there's another stepping stone on this path.
Okay.
So I did this comedy with Gary Jones, and that was that Seth Rogen film.
Yeah.
And then we went to LA and we started working on, Julie Andrews was doing a concert at the Hollywood Bowl.
Oh.
And so we did that, and we were working on a Western costume. So I'm like a kid in a candy store at this famed, you know, Hollywood legacy building, and Jeffrey Kurland walks through Gary's door,
who I've also interviewed.
And yeah, I listened to it. And so, you know, I of course know who Jeffrey Kurland is, and
he's awesome, by the way.
He's an incredible person, incredible designer, just the best. The best. If you can get in his corner at a party, you're going to have a great time.
Oh.
And so Jeffrey then said to me, you know, he's like, so what are you doing next? And I'm like, at the time, I'm a junior in college, you know, talking to Jeffrey Kurland, how crazy. And so I said, I have no idea. And he said, well, do you live in New York? And I didn't. And I said, yes. And he goes, great. My next movie is in New York. You should come be a PA on the film. And I said, great. I can't wait. Here's my email, you know. And I was like, well, now I have to figure out how to live in New York because I can go do a movie with Jeffrey Kurland. And so I did. And this was all the same summer. And that's when I started to learn, like, oh, this is how movies get made. It's like these little tiny meetings in the hallways of costume shops or in the fabric stores in New York, and introductions by old friends. Like, this is how this business operates.
Yes.
So then I did my first movie in New York with Jeffrey. And so then the New York bug sort of took hold. And then my next job after that was New Year's Eve, which you brought up. So all little stepping stones along the path. But yeah, so then now I'm a little bit more familiar on a set and in fittings, and Gary asks me to do New Year's Eve with him, which was insane. It's like it's the cast that you described, and it's like the pace was unimaginable.
I can't even believe. I can't even imagine what it was.
Constant fittings and it's a contemporary film, but it really taught me a lot about what it takes to make it a contemporary film. I think I had some idea that period movies or costumes that get built are somehow harder than contemporary, and that movie proved me wrong immediately and early in my career, which I think is very good to know starting out, that they are going to be equally difficult. But it was, it was a blast. And to meet Gary Marshall, who I had grown up watching incredible films by, it was all confirmation to me that this is how I'd like to spend my time on the planet.
When you were working, what I find interesting about this movie in particular, with so many different actors, I mean, I only scratched the very surface. There's so many other actors in here. I mean, there must be 50 known actors in this movie. What was it like when you have such a diversity of actors of all ages, shapes, sizes, colors, creeds, whatever? Did that teach you anything in terms of like in a movie like this, you're dealing with people from different walks of life all meeting, and it's like a microcosm of New York City itself? Or what did you learn in terms from your own perspective as a costume designer when you're interacting with all these actors, or you're watching Gary, how he interacted with these actors? Did you learn, or did you gain any insight into, I don't know, how to interact with actors and create characters out of clothes in such a way that you'd never seen before, I guess?
That movie was an enormous lesson to me in terms of how to deal with an ensemble cast. And I've done a number of films that have these ensemble casts since, and I think it really set up a foundation for me to understand how to best work with a group of people that way. And it comes back to a moment where Gary and I, we would do like 8 fittings a day sometimes, and not just like quick throw this on fittings, like, number one on the call sheet type fittings with these people. And it would be in different environments: the fitting room, the hotel room, someone's house, a trailer. And one time we were about to walk in, Gary stopped me and he said, "We need to reset a little bit." And I had no idea what he was talking about. And he sort of, closed his eyes real quick, took a big deep breath in, let it out, and went in and did the next fitting. And I realized what he was doing was, this job can be extraordinarily stressful, and you can take on a lot of other people's energies and burdens and criticisms and things. But you can't bring that into the next fitting. You sort of need to reset yourself as a costume designer when you work on an ensemble, with an ensemble cast. And so, it's funny to think like this one little inhale, exhale changed everything for me, but it really did. It taught me that your relationship to each actor needs to be just that. It's you and the actor. It's not you and the movie. It is you and the actor every time you go to get somebody dressed.
A fantastic lesson. That is a fantastic lesson to impart.
And I've used it since, like when I find myself in these moments where, like, I did Ocean's 8 with Sarah Edwards, and every morning it was going in to dress Sandra Bullock, Rihanna, Sarah Paulson. Again, it was all just very different people. And so you need to make sure that your relationship to each of them is consistent, and that you're delivering as a costume designer for that actor, not about the 3 fittings that you've done before that. It's right about what that actor needs in that space.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the greatest lessons, the way you just put it. Everybody is on a movie set. Everybody's in charge of their own realm, and their realm is the most important realm. And an actor is a realm unto themselves. And each actor, it's like going to a foreign country. You have to be focused on. And I've tried to explain that to people too. You just summed it up in a very succinct way. I think that everybody who's interested in the business should, hopefully they'll listen to what you just said, because every person you're interacting with is a new thing. It's a new deal. They don't know what you just did, and they don't know what you're going to do next. It's what you are doing right now that matters, and that interaction. I think that's a great lesson to learn. Now, after this film, you went on to work on one of the more iconic TV series of the last 20 years, which was 30 Rock. You know, and
Yes.
again with another, but and I know you're still learning, and you're still new to the world. You're still figuring things out, but you're working on I mean, going from Curlin to Gary Marshall. Now you're working on 30 Rock, created by Tina Fey, obviously, with another ensemble of incredible actors. What was it like to jump to television? Was that your first foray into TV, and how was it different?
Well, at the time, it was completely different because 30 Rock operated very much like a TV show. You know, there was like the same schedule for every episode. I can't remember exactly, but I think it was like you could have 5 days on, on the soundstage, and you could have 2 days out. And so the writers would have to craft episodes that fit into this schedule that worked for that crew. And so it was completely different for me than working on a film, which was like, a sort of lengthier prep period and a mostly set schedule that you could work towards those goals. Whereas TV, you were prepping and shooting at the same time, squeezing in fittings wherever you could. It was just such a different pace for me than I had experienced on film before. And I got to work with Tom Broker, who I think is a genuine master of costume design. And I got to experience how quick thinking his ideas were, and how, just because of time, like on a movie, anything is sort of possible because you have a little bit more time. But when you work in episodic, you have to be much more realistic about what you can offer, what you can pull off, and you have to sort of like hide your cards a little bit when it comes to the pace of television. And so those were some of the lessons that I was learning from Tom at the time, was just about like, how do you make the best choice with the time you have? We could all think about what's the best answer to this question if we had unlimited money and unlimited time. But what Tom taught me is, what's the best way to use what's in this space that's going to go on camera tonight, and that the relationship with Tom then became Saturday Night Live, where, another project I had grown up watching.
Yeah.
And if I thought I learned something about pace at 30 Rock, SNL blew the tires off that thing, because that is a beast unto itself.
Yeah, I mean, your career, as you were working your way through the industry, you would jump to movies like The Bourne Legacy with Jeremy Renner, and then you're doing Saturday Night Live, then The Amazing Spider-Man 2, then you're going to The Blacklist. I mean, and then Billions, and then doing a movie like Joy. I mean, I love your career progression. I mean, it's exactly. Did you have any? I mean, other than obviously you're forging relationships with people that would take you along, but did you have any control whether you'd wind up in a feature or on television? Did you want to go one way or the other, but you'd want to go to a feature, or you wanted a feature career, but they pulled you back into TV? Or were you kind of going with the flow and where people were taking you?
This goes back to a little bit about the way I was raised, which is that you should try everything, and you should learn what you like and what you don't like. That way you're not stuck in a life that you don't like. And so
Right.
as a child, that was, do you like tennis? Do you like baseball? Do you like soccer? Do you like theater?
Wow.
And so editing along the way created who I was at this point in my career. And then so I just used the same way of thinking with my career, where it was like, if I can figure out a way to work on a episodic, I should do that. Or, live SNL, or commercials, or I just wanted to figure out, like, I know that I want to be a costume designer, but what kind of costume designer? Because I feel like the sooner I was able to introduce myself to the world, the sooner I could start my own career. But I had to understand, what sort of contributions can I bring to a project? Like, am I somebody who is good on a series, or am I someone who's better in a film? And I wanted to, the only way to understand that about yourself is to put yourself into situations and find what's comfortable and what's uncomfortable. So whenever I got an opportunity to try a project that I hadn't done before, or work with a new designer, I always leapt at the opportunity to try to learn more. there was a moment where it was like, some costume designers go to grad school, some costume designers assist, or some start in the indie world. And so my version was to sort of like use my assistant decade as my grad school. And I was like, who better to learn from than the people who are out
Right.
here making everything like as we are watching it. And so I got to work with incredible costume designers and learn a bit about their process or their behavior, and decide like, what of that works for my approach in life, or what of that do I really not like, and I would change if I was in a position of power. And so I just collected little bits of information along the way, and didn't have to go to grad school to get an education in costume design.
No, I think your the philosophy that you are talking about right now is sort of exactly what I believe in. That's what I've tried to explain to people. Like you said, 10 years of grad school. I always heard that
Mm-hmm.
that it takes, I think it was Nicholas Meyer who directed Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, said it takes 10 years to become an overnight success in Hollywood. And I really believe that. I mean, try everything.
Mm.
Now, before I jump into when you made the leap into costume design, there's an interesting credit that I have to ask you about, only because I love her. So you become a costume designer, full-fledged. You're now captain of the ship. But in 2024, you went and worked on a movie called Canary Black, and you're credited as being the costumer for Kate Beckinsale. Now, I only ask
Oh, that's it.
because I love Kate Beckinsale, and whenever I see her on like Graham Norton or whatever, she's like hilarious, and she seems like, I mean, she would be like the coolest person. Not only is she incredibly intelligent and very beautiful, but she seems like she'd be cool. How did she lure you back to be her costume dressing for her on a movie when you could have been costume designing your own movie?
Well, I think it's a little bit misrepresented by IMDb. So
Okay.
here's the story behind.
I
From
had
what
to
I
ask. It's all I
understand,
could get. That's why I had to ask you, because I figured
yeah,
that
no,
seems a little, there's
I've
got to be a
never.
story here.
I have to set the record straight. I've never been a costumer. I think I would be terrible at the job. I admire the men and women who are costumers, because I think it is a very specific, patient skill set that my attention span is not geared towards that at all. So I've never been a costumer, and I don't want to misrepresent myself as one, because I do think I would fire myself if I was on my own team in that role. So from what I understand, Canary Black was happening, and there was some friction in the costume department, and it needed a revamp. And so producers that I had worked with previously called and asked if I would just take on Kate's role for this film. And it took me back into my like Bourne Legacy days, because it's an action thriller, a shoot 'em up, jump
Yeah.
over the hoods of cars. It needs harnesses and things like that. And the call came to me just as the project was ending, and I think it was like 6 weeks in between these two other films. And so I said, these producers that I had worked for, and they asked if I would just take on Kate. And I grew up watching the Underworld
Of
movies, and
course. I have them all.
love them so much. And so again, it's one of these phone calls where you're like, yeah, I want to know what that is like, and I'm curious about
So
doing that. And
you didn't know her before this?
no, I met her through that connection.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and she was every bit as charming as I hoped.
Well,
She's a great storyteller.
yeah, she's just hilarious. I mean, I love seeing her. And I figured I had to ask about it because you like the Underworld movies too. I think they're. I'm a big fan. I have the box set of the 4K discs of those movies. So, but then now in 2015, you jumped, rather than work for other people, you became the captain of your own ship. You jumped into full-fledged costume design, and it's interesting because you worked with a lot of really interesting people. You worked multiple times with Jennifer Lopez, on movies like Hustlers and Shotgun Wedding. You work with really interesting people. Like, I'm a big Bo Burnham fan, and you worked on, I think it's his first feature, which was 8th Grade.
Yes.
And
Yep.
you've really forged and then Mindy Kaling working on Late Night, and you've really forged an interesting career path as a costume designer. and again, working with a lot of really interesting people. Did you have the same philosophy about like letting things, like wanting to do everything, working with all different kinds of people, but then along the way you start to forge alliances with actresses like Jennifer Lopez? And if you go back and you watch when she was in Soderbergh's Out of Sight, that was like her first big. She's incredible in that movie.
She's unbelievable.
Incredible screen presence. And I actually really liked Shotgun Wedding, to be honest. I thought that was a lot of fun. Why
I did Wedding? I'll tell you the truth. I did Shotgun Wedding because I read. Well, first of all, I knew Jennifer from Hustlers, but when I read Shotgun Wedding, I kept thinking like, oh my God, this is a costume designer's nightmare project. Like, you have this, again, ensemble cast who is in formal wear in a pool for the majority of the movie. And then you have a wedding dress that needs to be, it's one costume for, for the majority. I would say 3/4 of the movie is one wedding dress. And so I was like, the easiest thing to do is read that and think, that's impossible. I'm not going to do that. I'm more the type that reads a script and is like, that's impossible. I want to be the one to figure that one out. And so I was like, how do you make a wedding dress interesting for 90 minutes, right? It's the same dress. How do you make it interesting? So I figured out, how am I going to break this down and change the silhouette and remove pieces and add aging and dirt and blood so that the dress at the end of the movie is not at all the dress at the beginning of the movie. Right. And that was this little swirling conversation in my brain that I was like, yeah, I want to figure that out.
How many multiples of that dress did you have to make?
I think we ended up with about 36.
Wow. This is just a neophyte question. When you have that many dresses, did you go through the script and like, was there continuity issues, or could you give yourself a rainbow of those dresses to how distressed they were throughout the film? Or did you do it all beforehand, or did you have to wait and see how they were damaged? Was it shot in sequence or out of sequence? I mean, how would you keep track of that dress?
Well, it's a whole process, really. And it was, the blessing of getting to work on some smaller movies at the beginning of my career was the invitation to be in the editing with some of those directors to understand, like, it's one thing to make a movie and to shoot it, but it's a completely other thing when you get into a dark room with a bunch of footage and you're trying to tell the best story that you can with what you've shot. And so I knew that if we divided that dress into like 16 iterations, I was going to completely lock the editor and the director out of too much manipulation in terms of story. So I was like, what's the least amount of phases that the dress can go through with certain, action that takes place in the film? Like, what's the least amount of dresses? That way the editor and the director have the most amount of freedom when they get into the cut. And so I distilled it into, like, I think it was 4 or 5 like versions of the dress, but each dress has about like 20 minutes on screen. That way they still had some flexibility. Like, if they wanted certain conversations to happen earlier or later, they still had that ability. Because I like to be like a defensive designer, and I hate to lock a director out of their own process once they've shot the movie because of costume choices. I think taking up too much energy as a costume designer is a mistake. If you're distracting your audience too much, or you're locking your editor out of their ability to do their jobs, I don't think you're being a team player.
Right. Interesting. That's really interesting. Other things that you've done, like we were talking about Jennifer Lopez, you've worked with her on multiple films. And also, this is kind of strange, but Jessica Chastain, you worked with her on 2 different movies that had Tammy in the title. I don't know what that means. I mean, there's George and Tammy, which is about Tammy Wynette. And then, of course, there's The Eyes of Tammy Faye, which is about Tammy Faye Baker. That's kind of odd. But my question, but I like that. I mean, again, in addition to Jennifer Lopez, I'm a huge Jessica Chastain fan. I mean, she can do no wrong. What's it like when you develop, I mean, obviously, actresses and clothes, they go together like, chocolate and peanut butter and Reese's peanut butter cup, and once you have a relationship with an actress that goes over multiple films, what are some of the lessons that you learn with when you're dealing with talent? I'm sure it's true of men as well. Once you learn who they are and what they prefer and what fabrics they like, how does that relationship develop with talent over the course of multiple projects?
I think honestly, what it is, it's the same. I would have that same approach to anybody that I work with,
Mm,
and it's that I want to understand when you, the actor or the actress, reads this scene, what comes up in your imagination. Because I read a script and I think about silhouette and fabric and what room it would be in and what clothes would make sense given the day that this character has had. But when an actor reads a script, they're thinking about the emotion, the tone, the beats of the scene. And so I always try to marry those two thought process so that we can deliver the same character. And I think when it comes to my relationship with Jessica, um, we work really well together in
mm,
terms of that approach. Like, you know, I feel like sometimes she and I can read the same scene, and I'll kind of know where she's going, and I think at this point kind of knows where I'm going to go with it, and we'll kind of meet in that middle, and she'll allow me to create based on my reaction to the script and what I assume hers will be. And that's not true all the time. There's other times where um, she'll come to me in the morning and say like, I was reading it and last night. She's a homework girl. Like she comes to set prepared. And so sometimes in that live creation, she'll be like, and I need a big bag and a big coat because I'm going to do this with it or something. And she'll give me something that's not necessarily on the page, but it is going to be in her performance. And so I'm very, very flexible with her. I always have a couple of ways that we can take on a scene because I think as an actor, what's really exciting about her is her presence and her being in the moment. And so I try to support her process as much as possible so that if we need to change something in the morning, it's not, the trailer's not on fire. It's like, oh yeah, 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 easy, easy, boom. And
right.
then we get it. Yeah.
So
But
there's you have a trust. I mean, there's that trust you've developed. How important is that trust between a costume designer and an actor?
essential. I think when that goes away, and it's possible that it does sometimes, right? I think when that goes away, there's no getting it back. And I think um, you have to have a trust with your actor that you're always going to have their back. You're going to listen to them when they have great ideas. You're going to listen to them when they have bad ideas, and you're going to know when it's time to divert if you feel like it's gone off path or if something doesn't make sense. For continuity's sake, it's you need to find the moment to let them know why that doesn't necessarily work with footage that's been shot. But I think ultimately, if you're I don't know, I don't think you're allowed to, as a costume designer, I don't think you're allowed to completely give up that trust with an actor because it is sort of what the whole relationship depends on.
Right. Interesting. I mean, well, now I've got to ask you about another, since we're talking about female actresses, let's go to the male actresses. You weren't the full-on costume designer, but you worked on the remake of Going in Style with Michael Caine
Yes.
and Morgan Freeman and Alan Arkin. When you're working, I mean, legends all. When you're working on a film like that, I mean, I know you were still on it, but did that, when you're working with guys that are that big of veterans, does that change the dynamic? Or is it because they obviously are such veterans, they already know, they know what they want, they know what, do you have room to move as a designer working on something like that? Or does that change what you do?
I actually think the more experienced an actor, the more of a desire they have to work with you because they have worked with everybody. And so I think, they've worked with the greats of our industry and they've had incredible costumes throughout their storied careers. And so I think it would be a mistake to think that they, to sort of keep yourself small in their presence because I think they actually really like the working relationships between actor
Mm,
and costume designer. And a lot of the best actors really depend on the costume design to take them that one last step to be the character. You hear about it so frequently that an actor will say, "Oh, it wasn't until I got into the costume that I really understood who this person was." But I think it is that, like, that last, it's the threshold between, their real life and their performance. You are that threshold. And so I think you want to be with the actor as they walk through it. You are the connection between who they really are and who they're going to be. And I think a lot of the best actors really cherish this relationship. And so, I always go in head first. I'm like, sleeves rolled, head first. Here are my ideas. And I try to keep it as conversational as possible, because these people, their entire lives, they will interact with some people in a fan capacity, or a manager capacity, or a director capacity. So you only want to occupy that space that they know a costume designer lives in.
Right. That's interesting. I mean, I love talking with you because this is one of my favorite interviews I've done in a while. There's a lot of insight about the process, about the whole, I love your approach to what you're doing. Now you just finished another movie with Jessica Chastain, Dreams, which I don't know anything about other than that it's a romance, and that Rupert Friend is in it. And Rupert Friend is coming off of a movie called Companion. He was amazing in that. That whole movie's amazing, but he was amazing, and he was almost unrecognizable. He's a very handsome guy. He made himself very unhandsome in that movie. I really gave him all the respect. It's an incredible film. Now you're doing another film with Jessica Chastain, and I'm curious. She seems to be like you. She's been in A-list huge movies. She's top line. Like, I can't get enough. I can watch Molly's Game once a week.
I know, right?
Yeah. I love her in that movie. I never get tired of watching that film, and of course Aaron Sorkin's dialogue. But she's amazing. I mean, she's really amazing, and she's also very chameleon-like. But she seems like you do. She's taken on a lot of different, like, she could just be in A-list tentpole properties if that's what she wanted to do with her life. But she's constantly taking really interesting parts, and this seems to be another. I mean, I know it's a romance. She's in love with a ballet dancer, or is she the ballet dancer?
It's a romance between a ballet dancer from Mexico and a sort of heiress type donor to the arts family, where she plays the daughter, and Isaac Hernandez plays the ballet dancer from Mexico. And this film is like very fascinating. The whole film is about the dynamic of power and who holds the power in a relationship. And the ballet world has this sort of interesting dynamic in it between donors and dancers, and how does money change a relationship?
Wow.
Always an interesting question, right? So this movie investigates immigration, it investigates power, it investigates dance, and it investigates love. And so it's the first movie that I've ever done like this, where Michel Franco, who is our director, he shoots and edits his movies at the same time. So with him on set are this team who will be editing the footage that we've just shot into the movie. So you can go up to them and ask for playback on things that you shot last Thursday, or based on performance, Michelle might say, the scene is actually changing and it's now this. And so it almost took me back to that SNL skill set, where you have to be like a part of the creation.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, it was really fascinating to work that way. I'd never seen anything like it. And I would jump back into his process in a moment's notice, because I felt it almost felt like like a costume designer. It almost felt like you were performing too. Like, that all of a sudden he would turn to you and say, like, no, she's in a robe for this. And you're like, okay, she's in a robe for this. Like, what are we going to do? How much time do I have? Where are we? We shot that film in Mexico City. And so you are part of the creation every single day, and there's no downtime. There's no going to get a nice coffee in a dark corner kind of a thing. It's not that movie at all. And then to work with dancers again, it's a bit of a through line for some of my work, is working with dancers. This time ballet. So it's the point shoes, the tutus, the plate tutus, the rehearsal clothes. It was so much fun to design, really.
Yeah, I mean, it looks. I'm excited to see it, and also I guess I got ahead of myself. I wanted to ask you about In the Heights. You know, I'm a huge. I love the film, and it looked like it would have been so much fun to make. And you know, maybe your director might amount to something one day on In the Heights. Who knows? You know,
Yeah, that's Jon Chu. Yeah, I think he's got a lot of promise. That
he
guy.
he might be going places. But that
Yeah.
film looked like it was extraordinarily fun to do, and you could have brought to bear a lot of like I was going to say your past. You just kind of alluded to that. What was it like getting, I mean, that job and coming out of, you know, in the wake of things like Hamilton and what that meant on Broadway and getting In the Heights? What was In the Heights like for you to get? And was it did you see it to be a big challenge? Because what's it like designing costumes when you know everybody has to be able to move in them? They have to be able to dance. They have to be able to.
It's the In the Heights, getting the call for In the Heights was extraordinary because it felt, I think at the time that came to me in my life, it was the biggest movie I'd ever done as the costume designer.
Yeah,
You know, I so respected John and what he wanted from the project, and so I really felt, um I did not know. I had a good interview and a great meeting, and I knew John from some work previously, but I was like, that's a big movie, and I didn't know how it would go. So when I got the call that it was my job, I remember like trying to play it cool on the phone, and I hung up the phone call, and then immediately blasted 96,000 from the musical, just because it was like all this
sure.
energy in my body, it's so exciting. And then the reality hits you like, oh, but now I need to dress like 2,000 dancers.
Yeah,
Like, whoa, okay. So then it was like building up a team that could take on that amount of costuming. And I, when we do like a period movie and you dress the background, and it's you feel like you're creating a world always. But In the Heights, I've never had to create the neighborhood. Like I you know in my career, I've created the restaurant, the wedding, like I've created events, but that was the first time I had to create, the male person, the bus driver, the people on the sidewalk, the women who work in the hair salon, like every street that you looked down, we had to create that
yeah.
on camera. Um, and so it was really fun working with the ads to try to figure out what types of people we wanted to see. I lived in that neighborhood at the time that we shot that, so I knew what the neighborhood was, and
Right.
I was like a sponge, just trying to extract every detail I could that would make it feel musical, right? Because it would be one thing to go up and shoot there as is, but this isn't a documentary, it's a musical. So it was trying to figure out like what details take this into that classic musical. I mean, John, he is the master of a musical. And so you don't just want to put jeans and sneakers on the camera. You
Sure.
want it to feel like this living, singing, breathing universe. So it was always I just like allowed myself to receive from the neighborhood, like what's interesting, what catches my eye, what could I turn the volume up on without crossing the line into, an impression of the neighborhood, like what feels real, but also feels like it could break out into song. So it was a really fun experiment in that sense.
What was it like when you were starting to design, like as you said, the neighborhood, when you're talking to John, what was your collaboration like with him? I mean, did he have to approve everything, or was there a little bit of trust there, or did he want to see every little bit that you were coming up with for every background
I have to
actor?
say, I have to say with John's super involved in the details. He loves like the tiniest little detail could become a close up, and that's always the threat with working with John, is that like your costumes have to be ready for close up, because it could be all of a sudden one dancer that you thought, oh, they'll be way in the back. Well, suddenly the shot starts on them jumping over a taxi with their shoe, like the sneaker on the taxi. So you kind of have to be ready at that micro level for the way that he's going to shoot a movie.
Right.
Um, and so it was a tremendous amount of research, boards everywhere, racks of clothing wheeling in and out of his office, and also closely working with Nelson and Alice, our production designer, cinematographer, just so that we all understood the palette and how is this movie going to, how are we going to move through this movie? Because your job, it's a musical, your job is to take the audience on this journey. So you have to control the color so that it doesn't just feel like this explosion 100% of the movie. You want to help the audience understand where we are, what to look at, and then work with the choreography to also understand like when does it explode, how does that work with the clothes. So it was really just this like constant discussion between all the choreography, cinematography, production design, props, hair and makeup, costumes. The conversation never finished. It was always, always ongoing. And then at a certain moment, I have to give Jon credit. He allowed me to do my job. He was like, you know the world. We've all built it together, and now it's yours to create inside
Wow.
of. And yeah, it was so freeing to be able to work that way. And I think a lot of what Jon was after for that movie was, authenticity. So if somebody, say they brought back one of the original cast members who, wanted to have their earrings from when they performed on Broadway, it was like, yes, like bring some of yourself to the project, or bring some of the project's history to the big screen. So anytime there was like some cool little connection like that, Jon just wanted more and more and more. But he really gave me a lot of freedom and a lot of space to make my own relationships to the performers, actors, dancers, singers, whoever, and then kind of lift them to the best place that they could be on camera, so that when he shot, you got it all.
Right. Well, that's exciting. I wanted to ask you about the two projects that you have that are still coming up, like Nick Cassavetes and his film
Yeah.
Bruno Penguin and the Staten Island Princess. And Anthony Hopkins is in this. Again, another
Yes.
legend. And then you have a TV series, which sounds relatively badass, The Savant, that's in post-production now, that stars Jessica Chastain and James Badge Dale, who I've always loved. So you have both a movie and a TV series coming out. What can you tell
Yeah.
us? What can you tell us about these? And one hasn't started shooting yet. The Nick Cassavetes movie hasn't, or has it?
I'll take Savant first, because that
Okay.
one we've done and it's to discuss.
I hope it
That
sounds.
is,
I mean, it sounds right up my alley. So I'm stoked
oh,
to
good,
see that.
good. I can say it is the ugliest costumes I've ever done in my lifetime, which is an extraordinarily fun challenge, because the show is about a very divided America, and it is about trying to blur the lines between left and right, and about, how did we get to this place that there's two teams in this country, and why do we think one way about this side and one way about this side, and what are the stereotypes of these people on either side of this line. So, do I think that America is a particularly good looking country in terms of its attire? I don't. But in terms of storytelling, uh, this was really very, very interesting to me.
I should say that
I
according to the IMDb, the all it says is it follows the Savant, played by Jessica Chastain, a top secret investigator who infiltrates internet hate organizations to bring down the nation's most violent men. I mean, that's what
Yes.
it says. I'm in. Count me in. We've just seen Jude Law do a movie like that, which was awesome. Can't wait to see this. So,
So we did something on this, which I think is really interesting. Like, it's all meant to be real people,
right.
and so it's the first time in my life I've ever bought clothing at a Costco, because that's where these clothes come from.
Yeah, sure.
So it's some of it is a little hard to look at for me. Like, a lot of my skill set is trained to like take the edges off things, find the beauty and stuff. And this was not that challenge. This was, what is so real that other costume designers might be afraid to put on camera, and how can we make sure that it gets featured? So,
Wow.
my team was laughing, but I had an incredible Adrian Dyer Ruda on the Savant, and I would take him, Uggs, and I would want him to paint the salt stains up onto the Uggs. because it's so ugly, but it's so real.
Right.
You know, I was like, how much polar fleece can we possibly get into this? You know, uh, that nasty, horrific fabric that Under Armour makes into like camo tops for men. All these things that I would never touch in my normal work became my clay on Savant. And it was really interesting about trying to make sure that you couldn't feel our hand in this at all. Like I really did not want anybody to talk about the clothes or to think about the clothes, because I wanted them to look like the people that you see in the grocery store, at the gas station. You know, so it was a very different type of work than a lot of the calls that I get, but a very worthy challenge.
Yeah, and coming from one of the writers of House of Cards and Anatomy of a Scandal, I can't wait. I mean, the Melissa James Gibson, definitely somebody to be excited about as far as the writing is concerned. So now, I'm excited. I don't know when it debuts, but count me in. I guess it's is it a limited series? It's an 8-episode season, or is it going to be a series that goes on, hopefully?
My understanding is that it's a limited series.
Oh, okay.
But so I don't know. There could be plans for it beyond, but I don't. If there are, I'm not aware of them just yet.
Right. And now working with Nick Cassavetes, which, I mean, I've always been interested, real diverse director. What is Bruno Penguin and the Staten Island Princess about? And how do you, I don't know if you can say anything about it, but
I don't know. I'll tell you what I can about it. It is a film about a wildlife photographer named Bruno, based on a real man, who sort of introduced the world to emperor penguins. And so we shot in Antarctica.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's not a comedy that takes place in Staten Island. So,
no.
Did you go to Antarctica to shoot?
I will be honest, I did not. I thought I wanted to until I understood the real human challenges to
Yeah.
there.
Did they actually go there? Did they shoot in Vancouver, like on a glacier?
No, they shot with the penguins in Antarctica.
Wow.
Yeah, we're still shooting. I think this will be a project that takes a few years to create.
Sure.
With some stops and stops in between, because it does. It depends on the life cycle of penguins, and so that's a really hard thing to schedule. You know,
sure.
penguins don't love an AD.
No.
So you're kind of
penguins don't love, and that's the quote of the year.
So you're sort of at the mercy of Mother Nature for some of the work that needs to be done for the project. But again, it was another one of these things where I read it and I was like, this is so impossible, which of course is like my trigger. And I'm like, well, I want to figure it out then, because it's about this wildlife photographer in the 70s and 80s in Antarctica. So there's very limited research. There's very limited clothing that's possible to put on camera for the project. And so I was like determined, I've got to figure this one out.
Well, it sounds, I mean, I'm excited about it. I can't, I mean, I can only imagine how gorgeous that movie's going to look too. I mean,
I've seen some of the footage, and it is like, you know,
it has to be
equal parts narrative, but also like, you know, these like Planet Earth sort of documentaries where you're just awed by our planet and the animals on it. So yeah, I'm excited to see what this becomes.
Well, listen, before we end this, and I always ask people, I mean, what advice can you give to people if they want to follow in your footsteps? And I mean, we don't know where entertainment's going to go. There's a lot of changes with everything from AI to all the other things that the industry is facing, but I don't think people are ever going to stop wanting to see real people on camera. I think one of the great appeals of cinema and television or streaming, whatever you want to call it, is that we know that there's real people that we're watching. It's going to be interesting to see psychologically moving into the next few decades if that still holds true. But no matter what, costumes are going to have to be designed.
I think, yes, we are definitely at an intersection or a crossroad in our business. But I think if we're being honest, our business has been at a crossroad and an intersection for its entire life
Yes.
cycle. You know, when visual effects took hold, it was like, oh, what will happen to movies? They thrived, actually, and we were able to tell stories that were bigger than human capability.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when sound got added to movies, everyone was like, what will happen now? It thrived, and I think we always come there can be a sense of like the sky is falling all the time in the entertainment industry, but I think that's just because it's never been a stable industry. It will never be a stable industry. And so I think to expect it to behave as a stable industry only keeps you up at night. And I think instead, if you learn to ride the waves as they come, this can be a real pleasure to work in this business.
It's nice to hear some positivity. I love that.
Well, I just think it's realistic. You know, do I think that there is going to be, 7,000 titles released every year? I don't think that's true. But I also don't think it was sustainable when we were doing it. So I don't know why we're all shocked that it's stopping.
Right.
I do think that human beings love to understand someone else's perspective, and I've not seen any AI tool that can give me that experience where I feel like I've seen the world through someone else's eyes.
Right. Which is what art is.
Maybe that technology can change, but I have not seen any AI art that moved me emotionally. It could be cool looking, that's sure. I've seen some cool AI in that sense, but I've never been emotionally moved by it. And until that happens, I am not worried for our industry.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That said, what advice might you impart to the next generation? You know, if there's people out there like you who are, I love the idea that you had a theater in your basement. You know, you're going to let's have a show with I used to make Super 8 movies with the kids in the neighborhood, you know, and dump ketchup all over them as blood and stuff. But for the kids that are doing those kinds of things now, and now with social media, you have a platform to show your work. I mean, if you actually went ahead and made those plays, you could have shot them with 4K iPhones and put them up online, and you might have had a worldwide audience by the time you were 13 today, we have the incredible technologies. But what advice could you give? What's that?
You're sort of leading towards the answer I was going to give, which is to embrace technology. Because I think the wonderful part of our business is the structure is typically the designer is more experienced, and then the younger people are gaining their experience. But the disconnect can sometimes be that you need that old school thinking at the top to deal with the interpersonal relationships, how to connect with a studio, or deal with the Hollywood system, right? These are all things that we know how to do because we've been in the business for so long. And so sometimes the younger generation coming in with a full embrace of technology is what makes you an asset. So, I remember being in my early 20s and understanding how to use technology with costume design in a way that the designers were overwhelmed by and didn't have the time for. And I became useful to them because, give me all the fitting photos, let me crop them, put them into the boards, make them easy that you can just send to a director. Like, I remember assisting designers who had come from the school of gluing the photos to the board and taking the boards to the director. And when that started to change, it just wasn't how those designers worked. But when I was able to insert myself into their same process of, they knew how to do the fittings and they knew how to create characters. But when I could show them, oh, this actually takes, 40 minutes and you can email the director tonight, then I became really useful to their, So I think the same is true now. Like, lean into technology, understand what would be useful in a costume department, being able to find clothes, right? Like, you Google Lens, sourcing on the internet, right? A lot of our brick and mortar resources are gone, and they're Joanne Fabrics closed, right? This is sort of the end of an era in which textiles are available in cities. But so to get ahead of that and understand how can we source things online? How can we get things for the designers to touch and react to faster? I think leaning into that instead of shying away from it is what's going to make you the easiest hire for a costume department.
That is great advice. And I totally agree with you. Well, listen, this has been a phenomenal interview. I want to thank you for being here. I've really enjoyed speaking with you, and this is a great time we spent, great hour, and it feels like it was lasted 10 minutes. So I want to thank you for your time, and this is amazing.
I'm totally honored by the invitation. Thank you truly for having me, because as I said to you off air, you've been in my AirPods a lot as I'm like pulling at Palace or Western or Eastern, all these places. You've had so many of the greats on your show, and I still think of myself as someone who is learning from them. So you've been in my AirPods quite a bit as I've been pulling.
Well, Mitchell Travers, listen, it was a great honor to have you on the Designing Hollywood show, and hopefully we will have you come back to talk about your next project.
Thank you.
A special thank you to founder and executive producer Martika Ibarra, co-founder, costume designer, the legendary Marilyn Vance, and of course, Jon Campea from The Jon Campea Show. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in to the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts. I am, of course, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and you can find me on Instagram at rmburnett, or find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or on YouTube at PostGeekSingularity. Thanks very much. Like, subscribe, and give us your comments. What would you like to see on the channel? Right down below. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Designing Hollywood.